Hello! Today we're looking at commas in English. We will look at commas again later in the course, but this is the introduction to commas and we're taking a different approach. We're looking at commas and intonation from when you speak. Obviously commas in English are very different to German commas, and so it's important that we can get these right. I've uploaded a document to StudIP which has a paragraph I wrote a long time ago about the Vikings. You'll see there are two copies of the same paragraph, and I've missed out all the commas and full stops. With the very first text on that sheet, the top text, I'd like you now to add all the commas and full stops, and I'll see you back here as soon as you've done that. Once you've done this text, put it to the side. We'll come back to it later. But first, let's look at 3 different uses of commas in English. We start with commas in lists. Number 1. I bought apples, oranges, pears and bananas. Obviously we have commas separating each item on the list. Number 2 is the same, but after the word pears we have a comma as well. That is especially common, or normal even, in American English. It's also possible in British English. It's called the Oxford comma or the serial comma for when you have a list of items. Some people will say that you can't have a comma before the word and. That's nonsense. Listen also to this. I bought apples, oranges, pears and bananas. Can you hear the intonation at the end of the sentence, and bananas? Your intonation goes down, and that signals to the person listening that there's nothing else on the list. Before that, every time we have a comma, there's a small pause. Apples, oranges, pears and bananas. Number 3 is a list with 3 items. Listen to it, I like hiking in the mountains, swimming in the sea and dancing in the moonlight. So you can hear the intonation there as well, can't you? I personally, for number 3, I would have a comma after swimming in the sea, and that's because each item on this list is a little more complicated than simply one word, like in number 1 and 2. So I think the comma there makes it easier for the reader. Otherwise you've got swimming in the sea and dancing in the moonlight. I think it's better with a comma, but it would not be wrong without a comma. Now let's move on to numbers 4 and 5. How many people would I like to thank in number 4 and in number 5? You can see the difference is in number 5 after Elvis Presley there's a comma and there isn't in number 4. Listen to it. Number 4. I'd like to thank my parents, Elvis Presley and Nina Hagen. And number 5. I'd like to thank my parents, Elvis Presley and Nina Hagen. In number 5, the people you want to thank are your parents, that's 2 people, and then Elvis Presley and Nina Hagen. In number 4, you want to thank your parents, who are Elvis Presley and Nina Hagen. So 2 people. Well, number 4 could be either, because it's unclear when we don't have that comma. But you can see the comma before the and, whether or not you have it, it makes a difference to the meaning. Okay, let's move on to use number 2. We use commas to separate linking words and adverbials from the main clause. So in number 1 we have an adverb of time, yesterday. So yesterday, comma, they went to the beach. This is in front position. Notice not all native speakers of English would have a comma there, but at our university, in our department, we do expect you to use a comma in that position. Number 2, furthermore, which means the same as in addition. So furthermore, comma, scientists are working on a vaccine. And in number 3, we've got moreover, which means the same as furthermore and in addition. We could have that in front position as well. Moreover, comma, they hope to have found it within a year. But in this particular case, I put it in mid position with commas on both sides of it. So they hope, comma, moreover, comma, to have found it within a year. Now look at numbers 4 and 5. However, when it's used as a linking word, means the same as but. It's just a fancy but, if you want. So, however, she did it. She was happy. So that just means but she did it. She was happy. But number 5, however, has a different meaning. However she did it, she was happy. You can even hear the difference in intonation, can't you? However she did it, she was happy. Egal wie sie es gemacht hat, blah blah blah, or something like that, right? So you can hear the difference in the intonation that the comma reveals to us. Number 4, however, she did it. She was happy. 5, however she did it. She was happy. So in all of these examples, the comma relates to the change in intonation. Yesterday, they went to the beach. Furthermore, scientists are working on a vaccine. They hope, moreover, to have found it within a year. Okay. Let's move on to use number 3. Commas are very important for certain relative clauses. I won't go into too much detail today because we will be covering this in quite a lot of detail on the grammar course. Let's look at these examples for now though. Number 1. Students who study English make good choices in life. Number 2. Students who study English make good choices in life. Okay. So, number 1, students who study English, we can think of that as being one referent, okay? That's just, I know, Anglistik Studierende, or students of English studies, right? In number 2, we've got these commas after students and after English. So that's a piece of information you don't need, that's just extra information. The basic sentence is, students make good choices in life. And who study English, that's extra information. That tells us that all students study English. So number 2 actually doesn't make any sense. Those 2 commas, if you look at numbers 3 and 4, that's just another way of writing those, although not a way that we would use on this academic writing course. In 3, you can see that the 2 commas, they work in the same way as brackets. And in 4, this is very much German style, I believe, using 2 dashes instead. Okay. So number 2, who study English? That's extra information about students, okay? That makes that a non-defining relative clause because that information, who study English, that does not define what we understand when we say students. In number 1, who study English, we need that. And so that's a defining relative clause because who study English defines what we mean by students. Students who study English. Okay. Listen to the sound of them again. Number 1. Students who study English make good choices in life. 2. Students who study English make good choices in life. Except, as we said, number 2 makes no sense because that implies that all students make good choices and all students study English. Okay, let's now turn to 5 of the top comma mistakes that people make. There wasn't time for the 5 common mistakes because I have to have this video under 15 minutes. Don't worry, we'll come back to that, but now let's return to the text about Vikings. This is the second text on StudIP. I want you to add the commas and full stops that you hear. Okay, so just write them down when you hear them from when I speak. So I'm going to dictate this. You ready? The Vikings, who were feared in their day across Europe, might have eaten magic mushrooms before going berserk into battle. Having settled in areas outside Scandinavia, such as the British Isles, they tended to live quite easily alongside the original population. Indeed, in the north of England, for instance, the Norse settlers often farmed some of the worst quality land, leaving the most fertile pastures to the Anglo-Saxons. They certainly left their mark on place names, however. For example, Grimsby and Thorpe are of Norse origin, as are many street names such as Kurgut, Westgut, Micklegut, and so on. Have a look at the answers in the next slide and compare the 2 versions you did on StudIP. See where the differences are before we look at this in any more detail. Pause the video if you need to. Who were feared in their day across Europe refers to all Vikings. It's extra information. Without the commas, that would only be one group of Vikings compared to the Vikings who were laughed at in their day across Europe. We use commas before expressions such as very often. Indeed is a linking word. Let's see, what else? Okay, and after Micklegut and before and, you don't have to have the comma. If you want to know about any of the other commas here, then follow the information on StudIP for contacting me in my office hour via Skype, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have. You know, when I was a child, a long time ago, we were not taught explicitly how to use commas. We certainly weren't taught about comma rules as such. Instead, I remember when I was very little, my mum would read something out loud and she'd say, I know, the cows were in the field, comma, which was on the other side of the farm, full stop. And then over time, she would read things out loud, which I would have to write down, where she would no longer say the words comma and full stop, but I could hear that from her intonation. Clearly, sometimes English grammar rules coincide with intonation, for example, with relative clauses. But in general, our commas do rely on our intonation. And so hopefully this video has given you a different idea of how to understand the use of commas in English. Okay, I'll see you in the next video for something quite different. Bye for now.